Support for third parties has risen to 63% given a new Gallup poll. Now, we're going to be talking about why we think this might be happening and whether or not it's a good or bad thing today on the left wing. I am Desmond Price of the Independent Thought Podcast, joined by my co-host TJ Whitehead and our guests Blair Walsingham and Kiki May. So this poll coming out of Gallup was reported on by The Hill. It says that support for a third major party in U.S. politics has ticked up to 63%. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans in the new poll say a third major party is needed because the Republican and Democratic parties are doing, quote, such a poor job of representing the people. Now, the figure is a 7-point jump from September when 56% said a third party was needed. Now, Gallup has been tracking this since 2003, and this is the highest it's been since the question was first being asked. And this is even higher than it was after the 2016 elections and the 2020 elections. Now, the idea of a third major party appears more popular amongst Republicans than Democrats, with 58% of GOP respondents saying it's needed. That's up from 13 points from last year. The poll notes that Republicans' perception of whether a third party is needed tends to vary based on whether or not Democrats are in office, while Democrats' independence and stance have been similar amongst both administrations. So this is the question I want to pose to our panel here. First, I want to go to my co-host, TJ. Why do you think we're seeing a rise in third-party support in America, and do you think it's going to continue?
Well, yeah, I think there's a rise in third-party support for, there's a ton of reasons. We aren't our parents' or grandparents' generations where, I'm a proud Democrat or I'm a proud Republican, and you have these machines in towns that people are proud to represent. And, that has gone by the wayside. That's never coming back. And also the actual reality that everyone knows that political parties and politicians do not work in our interest. And it's kind of funny to me because when Republicans say that the government doesn't have our best interest in mind, they're right. I mean, they're right. That's the one thing they're actually correct about. And instead of saying, well, we should make it so the government does have our interest in mind, their plan is, well, just don't have the government exist at all. Return us back to this like 1840s agrarian style country in the modern age. This is nonsense. But what frustrates me about this, a lot of questions that come out political season that frustrate me. The number one that gets me is when every election cycle, they always ask, do you think the country is headed in the right direction? And it's like, that question doesn't tell you a goddamn thing. It doesn't tell you anything, because I could say, no, I don't think it is. And the most, Milton Friedman motherfucker out there could say the same thing. And our number is going to be counted as yes, it doesn't matter. I think the same thing applies to this third party question, because all my life, my adult life, I've heard people say, what we really need is a third party, like there's some sort of genius or something like that. And I've never heard someone say that and then follow it up with a list of policies this third party would have. Like that's what bothers me, is that they say, yeah, we need a party that respects the will of the people. And I say, okay, well, what does that entail? And they haven't thought that far. And it's easy for us to say because like we eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. But, regular people know that the government is not actually working for them and they want something different. So they say third party. I say we need 5 or 6 parties, but I think that's really the reason why. Like, Blair, I think this is kind of your thing. Why? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, even after running as a Democrat and being a congressional nominee, I got to see kind of behind the curtain of what's going on in the political system, and it was worse than I could even imagine, to be completely honest. It's really more of like a gang war system, and it's not around our best interest. It's really about these divisive policy positions. And so there's this big media bias too. So between these two-party systems, they say you're either over here or you're over here, but majority of people are somewhere in here. They're not actually these polar extreme opposites, but that's all that we're kind of taught. So I think we're trying to break out of this cycle, and that's why you're seeing this increase of a third-party demand, is saying, well, hey, I'm not part of this extremism that I see on the news, and I don't agree with this. I don't subscribe to this viewpoint. So what can we do to change that? And you brought up a really good point about saying, the government doesn't work in our interest, and people right now, alongside of the rise of, hey, we need this third party system, it's the highest suicide rates, it's the highest poverty rates. We're seeing children slip into poverty. It's really not working for majority of people. So they're actually having to look inward and say, what can I do to be a part of breaking this system and creating a new one?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something, to challenge there, Blair, a little bit in terms of um, people generally being in the center and looking for something that represents the center. In my experience, I feel like, the majority of Americans support, abortion rights for women. The majority of Americans want access to affordable health care, things like that, which, tend to be something that is, more of the platform of a liberal or Democratic candidate. But I do think that, the what's feeding third party desires here is also tied to current events. So, right after the January 6th insurrection, that's when there was like a 61% or 62% desire to have a third party. And I think it ebbs and flows with things like that. I think the Republicans, maybe I'm full and I shouldn't be, but that the Republicans are dissatisfied to some degree with Trump as their candidate. They tried to get DeSantis out there and be the next sort of, messiah for them, whatever they're going to call, and that didn't pan out as they had planned. And now they still have to deal with the chaos that is Trump, and that he has all of these charges against him, all that sort of stuff. So I can see that playing into their desire. As far as, Democrats looking for a third party, I think it's definitely a push by millennial and Gen Z folks who are very disillusioned with establishment Democrats. TJ, share your thoughts in terms of, really understanding that the government isn't working, for us as it should be, and that they're serving their own interests and the interest of, political power and reelection and all that sort of stuff. I wonder more so, and, if we want to shift gears a little bit, just about if third parties and the desire for them, if there is if if it's a real expectation that can be implemented, because we know that there are so many hurdles to even just like getting on the ballot. So, like, how does this actually happen? If we want it and we're saying we want it, one, to TJ's point, what do those platforms look like? And two, how do we actually make it happen? I think that's the bigger question.
Oh, well, Blair, before you steal the spotlight here, because I know that you can answer that question very effectively. Before you do that, I just want to say it's it's been past time. It's not just that we need a third party, like TJ was saying, we need like 5 or 6, 7. Honestly, when you look at the political landscape, it's an obvious reaction to the current situation that we are in. No matter who is in office, the average like quality of life for working Americans just keeps dropping year over year, year over year, year over year. Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, doesn't matter. It just keeps dropping. And so when you see that happening, unless you're completely caught up in the partisan brain rot, which a lot of people are, but unless you're completely caught up in that, you rightfully, can diagnose the fact that this isn't working. It's just not working. It's not working. This back and forth and back. And yes, we can all come to the conclusion, as most people do when they get into these conversations, they get very heated and they're like, well, there's one side that's worse than the other. Okay. But you're still essentially admitting that they're both bad. And so that's not a solution. It's not a solution. There's no long-term solution here. And we're going to be arguing about who is worse while things continue to get worse indefinitely. And there has to be a path forward. There has to be something else. And if there's not, well, then I think it's just going to lead to more and more radicalism that we're seeing in the country. And I think a lot of what we are seeing, and we're going to be probably talking about this later on in the week when we're talking about Hillary Clinton, a lot of people get radicalized by the fact that things just aren't really working in this country. But Blair, you had a little more of a, I guess, direct involvement with third parties trying to get established in this country. What were the challenges that you experienced when you were like working with the Forward Party?
Yeah, so being a co-founder of the Forward Party was a huge learning curve again. Figuring out what those barriers and challenges were in each state on becoming a third party and the success of third party candidates is almost insurmountable. You're talking about really minor details between your paperweight that you collect your signatures on, making sure you have enough signatures to even get there in the first place, all the different deadlines, and the massive amount of money. So I would say that's a huge driving factor behind this is the established two-party system have these massive super PACs who funnel millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars into making them successful. And the reality is that works, right? To be a successful candidate or a successful new party, you have to get around the media, you have to get your name out there, you have to be heard 5 to 7 times before people even remember it. And that all costs a lot of money. We're also at a point where it's considered the fourth industrial revolution, where technology is just changing so quickly. And some generations, we're brought up in it. You have like the iPad generation now where they've always had technology. I'm a millennial. I grew up, we still had the dial phones, but we had computers, we had cell phones, right? I'm dating myself because I know what a floppy disk is. But the people who are elected are not of these generations, right? We can look at that too, and they don't understand the technology. We've seen that, but us living it, we kind of get it, and we want to see those changes happen. So there's kind of this combination of all these different aspects and challenges between the everyday lives of people, the changes in technologies, the struggles, the financial aspects, and then you have these powers in place who don't want to give it up. And it's incredibly difficult to become a third party, and it's incredibly difficult to be a successful third party or independent candidate because you're not invited to debates. Your name is not in the news. Half the time they'll say, hey, here's these 2 candidates, and there's like 10 more that you've never even heard of. So there's this just huge, massive barrier to entry for third-party systems. Can we do it? Absolutely. But people need to be willing to invest in it, and they have to believe that a third party or other party or candidate can win. And you hear that a lot. People would say, I'd vote third party, but they'll never win. I like this candidate, but they'll never win. So it's kind of a challenge of like the educational barrier and saying, hey, we can win. All you have to do is vote for them. But as to Desmond's point, a lot of people who are politically involved are basically like gang war politically involved, whereas vote blue no matter who, or vote red or you're dead. It's these really extreme feelings of survival for that party. So if we want to get more people engaged to vote outside of their party system, they may say, hey, I'm independent, but they typically vote left or right. We have to be able to support those candidates and those groups, and that takes a lot of effort that people don't have the bandwidth for because they're working 2 or 3 jobs. They're just trying to pay their bills. And again, to Desmond's point, we've had all these elected officials in the past, and we're just consistently declining. So it's like, does it really matter? Does my vote actually count? There's all these factors to really hammer in and try to connect with people. And I think the show actually does a great job of trying to present different facts, but different opinions, right? We may disagree today, but we're willing to talk about it respectfully and try to come to an actual solution instead of just saying, vote against this person. We want to vote for something. So I think that's part of getting there. It's a multifaceted approach.
Yeah.
So Blair, I wanted to ask you about something you said in your first segment, and you talked about how most people are in the middle. And I mean, you have more experience than I do, but from what I've ascertained, I don't see that to be the case. To me, it seems most people are just scattershot, not necessarily like have middle of the road views. It's like for example, there are plenty of people out there who are like, against abortion, but pro gun control or something, and so there's no party for that person. But I wouldn't consider their views in the middle. Like they just have, the 2 standard views, but they're combined together. Have you run across it, like how to solve that problem?
Yeah, so I'll give you 2 responses to this. So one, I ran in one of the reddest districts in the entire country, Tennessee 01, as a Democrat and became their congressional nominee. And part of why my campaign broke records there and was so successful was because I talked to everybody there. I did not just court Democrats or independents or non-affiliated voters. I went straight to Republicans. I would show up at Republican events and I would talk to people. And usually they would come up to me and they may start the conversation a little bit aggressive, But usually if we just talked about it, they would be like, oh, wow,
Mhm.
you're not like an evil baby murdering, villain. But that's kind of what our reputations have been painted to one another. So even talking to people I would consider on polar ends of the spectrum from me, from a political standpoint, we did usually find some common ground. So I don't really like the term centrist or middle because it kind of makes you seem like we're right here and we may be like
Yeah.
more here, but we're not over here. Most people, we all want the same thing. We want to be healthy, we want to be happy, we want opportunity, we want our kids to be safe, we want to be able to feed our families, own homes. All of us generally want that. It's kind of how we get there is where we get kind of lost in the sauce is, well, I think this idea would get us there and I think this idea would get us there. So it's really, I don't think that we want such different things. There are wedge issues, right, that people feel really strongly about
Yep.
that they may never budge on. But the majority of things, what I call like pothole politics, like I need to feed my family, I need this road to not be flooded, the things that affect everyday lives, we're almost all like right here next to one another. So the second part of that, and this goes to the previous question too, is third party policies. Everybody says, hey, we need a third party or multi-party system, but what do these policies look like? And I think that's part of the struggle is there's a large, massive 63% of us saying, hey, we need this. So it's hard to find an agreement on what does the third party policy look like because we have to kind of agree. And Forward Party actually faced a lot of scrutiny about this. They would say you have no policy, you stand for nothing. But at the root of it, we actually supported the reforms such as ranked choice voting, open primary systems, so that you're not forced to vote with one party or another. You can just pick your candidate. And I think that is really the clear path to getting there is first breaking down these barriers to entry. And then we can come back to the drawing table and say, okay, so let's take a look at these solutions. Let's get these experts together. Now we have some new representatives in place. We have a more actual representative democracy, and let's talk about these solutions instead of the divisive topics that keep us just voting one way or another. So ultimately, I think the policy part actually comes a little bit later after shaping the system. Otherwise, we keep fighting, we keep going in the same circle over and over.
Yeah, and I'm in complete agreement, Blair, in terms of what you said about the fact that, we all basically are agreeing on how we want the same basic needs met. And it's about how to get there, and that's where the real differences come in, the path to get there. Um, that said, when we're talking about, some of the more extreme wedge issues, um, I think the current two-party system is capitalizing on wedge issues to distract you from the fact that they're really sucking at their jobs. So like
Yeah.
let me like talk to you about, how trans people are coming for your way of life. So you don't realize how every economic policy that I've supported or, implemented hasn't worked and in fact has put you off in a worse position. Or, Democrats will, sit and sing kumbaya after the Capitol riots sitting on the front steps. Meanwhile, they are continuing to, have policies that are problematic in terms of immigration and border security, which we'll talk about later, continue to unable to, um, fulfill their promises, which is codifying Roe and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's a way to distract people. And this is where third parties could come in, is where, we're going to actually have third parties that focus on policy specifically and try to move away from these wedge issue pieces. Um, and the other thing I just wanted to mention briefly is you talked about the barriers to entry, and I think that's also something that influences whether or not people get into third party politics in general. So if I want to run as a third party candidate, I'm maybe most likely I'm from an underrepresented community of some sort. I'm a dissenter, right, already, and maybe I have institutional, structural barriers that would make it difficult for me to even like start the process or have the time to be able to pursue that path because of that, which just like, is a great weakness of the current two-party system and all of the money and influence that it takes to actually break into it in general. And I am a big proponent of ranked choice voting as like the sort of incremental way to get us there eventually. And it helps with the whole, the spoiling of the vote thing. You don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
You can feel like you're still voting your conscience and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
very
think.
much
Oh, go ahead.
a pay to play system, like you said. So for congressional level, you need about $1 million to win a race. So if you don't have $1 million, you can't raise at least $1 million. You can't quit your job because you're just a person, right? You're a human who has bills to pay. Then you can't basically get in there. So it is a pay to play system. It is definitely a barrier. And then I just wanted to second the ranked choice voting. I think would help a lot of people who are fear driven. If I don't vote for this candidate, then I'm going to get stuck with this other terrible one, and that would
Mhm.
help free people to vote who they really want.
Yeah, I think ranked choice. I more or less know ranked choice voting is a necessity if we're ever going to get anything beyond Republicans and Democrats. And
Yeah.
I want to mention something that Desmond talked about earlier. I think it was Desmond that Republicans are more open to third parties than Democrats are. I think you said that,
Currently.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
currently. And so I think a big reason behind that, Blair mentioned the vote blue no matter who and everything, is that when Democrats lose elections, they immediately start shitting on third party candidates. They it's the first thing they do and say, well, if we hadn't had this third, which is absurd because no
Oh my
one is
God.
you don't owe anyone your vote. If you can't convince someone to vote for you, that is your fucking fault, not the voters. But you notice Republicans don't do that. I have a hard time thinking of examples of when Republicans lost and they said, man, if it weren't for those damn libertarians, we would have won. I don't see that
Well,
happening.
you see, TJ, you're just missing slightly thing here that they don't blame the voters. They just blame other things, dead people,
Yeah, too many.
voter
Well, that's
rolls,
well,
illegal ballots, all that kind of
yes.
stuff.
The
And
entire
so
system is rigged.
the Republican strategy isn't to voter shame, it's to limit as many people as possible to vote. That which is actually even worse. But the ranked choice voting thing, like currently, I think is the best way. Honestly, now like the easiest way for a third party candidate to win is for the third party candidate to be like a celebrity or something, like Jesse Ventura or stuff like that. That's the most effective way, because like Blair's talking about, the money and the name recognition, it really hurts. I mean, it really hurts an average person.